I stood in the lobby of the Harbor Line Grand and stared at the notification on my phone. My black card had just secured a penthouse suite for 3 nights with the note anniversary surprise attached to the bill. The problem was not the price, but the names listed on the reservation. It was my husband and a woman named Blair Voss. I hovered my thumb over the freeze button, ready to strand them both without a dime. My name is Sloane Whitaker, and at 34 years old, I thought I had built a life that was immune to cheap surprises. I was wrong. The vibration of my phone against the mahogany desk was the only warning I got before my reality fractured. A notification from the Harbor Line Grand in Chicago lit up the screen. It was a receipt for a 3-night stay in their penthouse suite, billed to my black card. The total was enough to buy a decent used car, but the cost was irrelevant compared to the note attached to the reservation. Anniversary surprise. And right below that, the guest names were listed in bold black font: Graham Halden and Blair Voss. I dialed Judith Halden immediately. My mother-in-law answered on the second ring, her voice smooth and unbothered. "Sloane, dear, is there an issue Graham is checking into the Harbor Line with a woman named Blair?" I said, my voice dangerously steady, and he used my card to pay for it. "Oh, that?" Judith replied, sounding as if I had asked about a grocery list. I told him to. I'm just helping Graham get his confidence back. You know how stressed he's been. Honestly, Sloane, you just don't fit that lifestyle anymore. He needs inspiration." The call ended before I could scream. My fingers flew across my phone screen, opening the banking application. I found the transaction, pending authorization. I pictured Graham standing at the marble front desk, flashing that charming smile while the receptionist swiped the heavy metal card. I pressed freeze card. 30 seconds later, my phone rang. It was Graham. Sloane. His voice was a hushed, strangled hiss. "What are you doing?" The card was declined. "There are people here, looking at me like I'm a criminal. You are stealing from me." "Graham," I said, "it's just a booking error. Unfreeze it. Sloane, please." "I can't fix this right now." I hung up and grabbed my coat. I needed to see it. The Harbor Line Grand was only 10 blocks away. When I arrived, the lobby smelled of white tea and expensive leather. I positioned myself near a potted palm by the private elevators, invisible to the casual observer. The doors slid open, and I saw them. Graham looked flushed and sweaty, frantically texting on his phone. Beside him stood a woman I assumed was Blair Voss. She was immaculate in a cream coat, looking bored rather than embarrassed. She smiled slightly, a small, knowing curve of her lips that made my stomach turn. Before I could step forward, a hand clamped onto my upper arm. I spun around to find Judith standing there, her face a mask of cold fury. She dragged me into the shadow of a decorative pillar. "You foolish girl," she whispered, her nails digging into my skin through my jacket. "You think this is about you. Don't make a scene. If you ruin this weekend, you will lose a lot more than a husband." "Let go of me," I said. She released me with a shove. "Go home, Sloane. Know your place." She marched toward the elevators to join her son. I stood there, shaking with adrenaline, when a concierge hurried past me toward the front desk, speaking into his headset. "Yes, sir. The suite for Mr. Halden is ready. We have prepared it for the meeting as requested. Privacy guaranteed from 11 at night to 1 in the morning." I froze. A meeting. At midnight. Who scheduled a business meeting in a romantic penthouse suite in the middle of the night? This was not just an affair. Graham was lazy, but he was not a workaholic. My phone buzzed again. I looked down, expecting another plea from Graham or a threat from Judith. Instead, it was a text from an unknown number. It was a blurry photo of the hotel elevator bank, taken from a different angle than where I stood. The caption chilled me to the bone. "Don't cancel. They are exchanging documents in the penthouse." The drive back to the temporary apartment in Oak Park felt like a funeral procession for a life I had not realized was already dead. The place was a sublet I had taken a week ago when Graham said he needed space to focus on his mental health, but the silence inside those walls was heavy enough to crush bones. I sat on the beige sofa and unlocked my phone. My college friends' group chat, usually buzzing with notifications on a Friday night, was completely dead. I scrolled up. Nothing. The radio silence was a verdict. The narrative had already been spun. I was the crazy wife. I was the one jeopardizing Graham's fragile career with my jealousy. My phone pinged, marking the arrival of a text from Graham. "I need space." The message read, "You are embarrassing my mother. Do not cling." It is pathetic. I stared at the screen. Cling. The word tasted like ash. I tossed the phone onto the cushion and opened my laptop. If they wanted to paint me as the villain, I needed to understand the script they were writing. I logged into the bank portal, bypassing the joint checking account and digging straight into the credit card administration panel. I pulled up the details for the Judith Halden premium card. For years, I had assumed Judith paid for it herself and simply linked it to our family profile for points. I was wrong. The primary account holder was not Judith. It was me. I clicked on the authorization documents, my heart hammering against my ribs. There it was, my signature, looped and trusting. Dated 3 weeks after our wedding, I remembered that afternoon. Judith had come over with a stack of papers she claimed were for life insurance and estate planning. "It is just to keep you safe?" "Sloan," she had said, sliding a pen into my hand. "Standard family protocol. Just sign here and here." I had signed my financial autonomy away under the guise of safety. I began to scroll through the transaction history, looking for patterns. It was not just the hotel. There were monthly transfers of $5,000 going to a limited liability company called Lakefront Advisory. I searched the name in a separate tab. It was a generic consulting firm with a vague website, listing services for executive image management. But the dates of the payments coincided perfectly with Graham's supposed business trips. Then I saw the charge for the Harbor Line Grand. It was pending, but the category code was already visible. It was not listed under travel or leisure. It was coded as vendor meeting client hospitality. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. They were not just having an affair on my credit. They were expensing it by coding it as a business meeting. They were creating a paper trail to justify the expense to his company, or perhaps to write it off on taxes. It legitimized the room. It legitimized the presence of Blair Voss. I grabbed my phone and dialed Judith again. I needed to hear her voice one more time. I needed to know how deep the rot went. She answered, but she did not say hello. "You are persistent," she said, her voice dry and bored. "The card is in my name. Judith," I said, my voice shaking despite my best efforts to keep it steady. "You tricked me into signing liability for your spending. That is fraud." "Oh, please," she scoffed. "You benefited from the prestige of the Halden name. Consider it a service fee. Besides, do you really want to start digging into signatures and documents?" "What is Lakefront Advisory?" I asked. There was a pause on the other end. A sharp intake of breath. "You think you are the only one with secrets," Judith hissed. "If you keep pushing, Sloan, you will find that you have no idea who you are actually married to." The line went dead. I sat there for a long time, the silence of the apartment returning with a vengeance. She was right. I did not know who I was married to, but I knew who I was. I was a risk analyst. I found patterns in chaos for a living. I opened my archived emails, searching for a specific folder I had created 2 years ago when Graham was promoted to director at Orion Crest. He had made me sign a spousal non-disclosure agreement, claiming it was company policy for all senior executives. I found the PDF and opened it. I scrolled past the confidentiality clauses and the non-disparagement sections until I found the termination conditions. There, in fine print at the bottom of page 9. This agreement shall be rendered null and void immediately upon the proof of any commission of felony, fraud, or gross financial malfeasance by the protected party. I leaned back, the blue light of the screen illuminating the dark room. They thought they had trapped me in a cage of social pressure and debt. They forgot that every cage had a lock, and every lock had a key. If the Penthouse was a business meeting and that business involved fraud, then the NDA was worthless. I was not just a scorned wife anymore. I was a witness. I walked into the offices of Price and Hallow with my spine straight. Though my hands were trembling inside the pockets of my trench coat, Morgan Price did not look like a woman who offered tea and sympathy. She sat behind a desk made of glass and chrome, looking at me with an expression that was entirely transactional. "Sloan, we have a decision to make before we begin," Morgan said, her voice low and devoid of warmth. "There are 2 roads. Road 1 is the high road where you file for divorce, take a settlement, and quietly retreat to lick your wounds. Road 2? Well, Road 2 is where we pull the thread and bring the entire structure down on their heads. I do not want to retreat," I said. Morgan nodded once, satisfied. She pressed a button on her intercom. "Send them in." 2 people entered the room. Morgan introduced them as Cal Ward, a digital forensics specialist who looked like he had not slept in days, and Nina Kessler, a forensic accountant with eyes as sharp as scalpels. They did not waste time with pleasantries. Nina dimmed the lights and projected a complex flowchart onto the wall. "We call this the money map," Nina said, pointing a laser at the center circle. "Funds move from your joint account into Lakefront Advisory LLC. From there, the money is not being invested. It is funneling out to pay for the lease on a Porsche Cayenne, a diamond tennis bracelet purchased last month, and a series of recurring rentals for conference rooms at chain hotels." "Hotels?" I asked. "Always the same pattern." Nina replied. "Booked under hospitality or vendor meetings, just like the Penthouse at the Harbor Line. They are using corporate codes to mask the affair. The money is bad, but the data is worse." Cal interrupted. He stepped forward, opening a laptop. "I pulled the router logs from your apartment. Look at this timestamp, 2:47 in the morning, 3 weeks ago." I looked at the screen. A device labeled Graham's iPhone had accessed a shared folder on my laptop. The folder was named Draft Specs. A cold sensation washed over me. I was not the naive housewife Graham liked to portray to his friends. Before I married him, I was a senior product manager for infrastructure technology. I built systems. I understood high-level architecture. Even after marriage, I kept my hand in, sketching out ideas and protocols on my private drive. I had deliberately lived small to support Graham's ego, but my mind had never stopped working. He broke into my laptop, I asked. He did not just break in. Cal said, he extracted data. I ran a hash check on the file signature. That exact file, with the same unique digital fingerprint, was uploaded to an external server 40 minutes later. The server belongs to Orion Crest Systems, Graham's company. He had stolen my intellectual property to feed his employer. "There is a twist," Nina said, pulling up another document. I ran a background check on Lakefront Advisory. It is not registered to Blair Voss. The registered agent is Arthur Penhaligon. My breath hitched. "That is Judith's personal estate attorney. Your mother-in-law created the shell company to facilitate the payments," Nina confirmed. But here is the smoking gun. "There is a transfer labeled donation from Orion Crest to a non-profit called the Urban Research Fund. That fund is managed by the husband of the lead evaluator for the upcoming federal infrastructure contract." The room went silent. The picture was complete. They were not just cheating on me. They were using my stolen work to bid on a contract they were bribing to win, and they were using my credit history to hide their tracks. Morgan reached into her drawer and pulled out 2 heavy binders. She placed them on the glass surface with a heavy thud. One was labeled Binder A and the other Binder B. "Binder A gives you a clean divorce and 50% of the assets," Morgan said, leaning back in her chair. Binder B triggers a federal investigation. So, Sloane, do you want to win the breakup, or do you want to ensure they lose their future? I looked at the binders. I thought about Judith's smug face in the hotel lobby. I thought about Graham accessing my work while I slept beside him. Burn them, I said. I want Binder B. Morgan laid the documents out on the conference table. They were emergency motions for a temporary restraining order on all joint assets and a preservation order preventing the deletion of any digital data. It was a legal blockade designed to starve them out. Once you sign this, the court freezes everything, Morgan said, handing me a heavy fountain pen. He will not be able to buy a coffee, let alone pay off a blackmailer. Are you ready for the backlash? I have been ready since I saw that hotel receipt, I said. I signed my name with a steady hand. The ink was still wet when my phone began to vibrate. It was Graham. He had called 12 times in the last hour. I finally answered, putting him on speaker so Morgan could hear. Sloane. Thank God. Graham's voice cracked, sounding nothing like the polished executive he pretended to be. You have to stop this legal insanity. I am in the middle of a massive deal. A life-changing deal. You are killing me. You killed us when you walked into that elevator, I said. It is not what you think, he stammered. Please, just release the accounts. If my credit check fails during the diligence phase, I am ruined. I hung up. Almost immediately, a text message arrived from Judith. It was classic Judith, a velvet-wrapped threat. If you open your mouth to anyone outside this family, we will ensure the public sees you as unstable. We have the doctors to prove it. Be smart. Sloane. I stared at the screen, feeling a cold knot in my stomach. Before I could process her audacity, another message popped up from an unknown number. You canceled the card at the exact right moment. I like a woman who knows how to strike back. It was signed Simply B. Blair. She was taunting me, or perhaps she was bored. We have a problem, Cal said, spinning his laptop around. I am seeing a massive spike in login attempts on your personal email and your old cloud storage accounts. The traffic is routing through a VPN in Estonia, but the pattern suggests a coordinated attack. This is not a jilted husband looking for love letters. This is a digital excavation. They are digging for dirt. I felt a sudden wave of paranoia. I instinctively checked my phone's location settings. Buried in a subfolder of utilities was an app called Family Guardian. Judith had insisted we all install it 2 years ago for safety during a ski trip. I saw the little blue dot pulsing on my location. They know I am here, I said. Judith has been tracking me. I deleted the app, my fingers trembling slightly. I had been living in a glass house while they stood outside with stones, waiting for the signal to throw. The intercom buzzed. Morgan's assistant walked in, looking pale. She was holding a thick envelope made of expensive, cream-colored linen paper. This was just hand-delivered by a courier, the assistant said. Morgan opened it. She read the contents, her eyebrows lifting a fraction of an inch. Well, Morgan said. This just escalated. Who is it from? I asked. It is a cease and desist letter accusing you of tortious interference with a prospective business contract, Morgan said, and it is not from Graham. It is signed by Rylan Voss, the CEO of Orion Crest, Blair's father, I whispered. A CEO of a billion-dollar company does not personally threaten a junior executive's ex-wife unless she is holding a knife to the company's throat, Morgan said, tapping the letter. You are not just an annoyance to them, Sloane. You are a danger. We have found the nerve. I looked at the letter, then at the black screen of my phone. They were scared. Rylan Voss was involved, which meant the stakes were astronomical. If I let the lawyers fight this out on paper, they would bury me in motions for years. I needed something faster. I needed a confession. I am going to meet him, I said. Morgan frowned. Absolutely not. That is dangerous and strategically foolish. He thinks I am weak, I said, standing up. He thinks I am the emotional, jealous wife Judith told him I was. I need to play that role one last time. I will meet him. No lawyers. Just a wife wanting closure. Sloan. Morgan started. I can get him to say it. I interrupted. I know Graham. When he is panicked. He talks too much. I am going to set the trap. I sat in the back corner of a small coffee shop in River North, watching the door. I had sent the text to Graham at 7 in the morning with a simple instruction. Come alone. At 7:45, my phone vibrated with a secure notification from the internal server of the Whitaker Relay Group. I opened the message and felt a jolt of electricity run through my spine. The Federal Emergency Infrastructure contract had been signed. The value was $1.1 billion. The press release was scheduled to go live at exactly 9 in the morning. I checked my watch. It was 8 o'clock. I had exactly 60 minutes. For the next hour, I was still just the scorned wife in Graham's eyes. At 9, the world would know I was the CEO of the company that had just beaten Orion Crest for the contract of the decade. I needed his confession before the power dynamic shifted so violently that he clammed up forever. Graham walked in 3 minutes late. He looked like a man who had not slept in days. His eyes were red, his shirt was wrinkled, and sweat beaded on his forehead despite the air conditioning. He spotted me and marched over, sliding into the booth with a frantic energy. "Are you playing dirty?" Graham hissed, leaning across the table. "My mother said you have lawyers looking into the trust." Looking into everything. I kept my hands wrapped around my warm mug, projecting an image of exhaustion and defeat. I needed to think I was breaking. "I am tired, Graham," I said softly. "I just want to pay off the debt and be done with this. I want to be left alone, but I need to understand why. Why did you and your mother have to use my card to book that penthouse? Was the humiliation not enough?" Graham ran a hand through his hair, looking around the cafe nervously. "It wasn't about you. Sloan," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Blair needed a private space, a secure space for the presentation. Rylan is testing my loyalty. He wanted to see if I could handle the logistics without corporate oversight flagging the expense." "A presentation," I repeated, letting the word hang in the air. "So, the file you took from my laptop? That was just for the presentation, too." Graham froze. He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing slightly. "You know about that?" he asked. "I know someone accessed my draft specifications at 3 in the morning," I said, keeping my voice level. "Why? Graham, did you really need to steal from me to impress a mistress?" It wasn't for Blair, Graham snapped, his defense mechanism kicking in. It was for the bid Rylan pressured me. He said, "Since you used to work in the industry, you might have some old insights." He told me to get insight from my wife. He said it was a test of my commitment to the company. I leaned in closer. "So Rylan Voss told you to steal the file." "He didn't use the word steal," Graham stammered, his eyes darting back and forth. "He just said to acquire the data. And my mother? She gave me the Wi-Fi password to your laptop. She said we were a family, and what is yours is ours. Blair showed me how to bypass the login. I didn't want to do it. Sloan. I had no choice. I was under so much pressure. He was unraveling, pouring out the truth to save his own skin, oblivious to the fact that he was burying himself. He blamed his mother. He blamed his boss. He blamed his mistress. "You signed an addendum in that room," I said, taking a gamble. "What was it?" "Just a transfer of rights," Graham mumbled, looking down at his hands. "To certify the data source as internal Orion property. If I didn't sign, they were going to fire me." I looked at my phone on the table. The screen remained dark, but the recording app was running in the background. My watch read 8:58. "You have no idea what you have done," I said quietly. "I can fix it," Graham pleaded, reaching for my hand. "Just stop the lawyers. I will make it right." My phone vibrated against the table surface, a long, sustained buzz. I glanced down. It was a calendar alert. 9 in the morning. Press release live. The game had just changed. I looked up at Graham, and for the first time that morning, I smiled. It was not a nice smile. The large television screen mounted above the barista station flickered, the volume suddenly rising as the morning news alert cut through the ambient jazz. It was exactly 9 o'clock in the morning. The banner headline flashed an urgent red federal infrastructure contract awarded to Whitaker Relay Group. Graham glanced up, distracted by the noise, and then his eyes widened until I thought they might snap. On the screen, a press conference was taking place. Standing at the podium, flanked by government officials, was a woman in a sharp navy suit, projecting an aura of absolute command. It was me. Graham looked from the screen to me, then back to the screen. The cognitive dissonance was almost violent. He had spent years treating me like a fragile accessory, a woman who needed his mother's guidance to navigate social circles. Now, he was watching that same woman accept a $1.1 billion contract that his company, Orion Crest, had been desperate to secure. "Impossible," Graham whispered, his voice failing him. "You are." The CEO. I took a slow sip of my coffee, watching the color drain from his face. "You thought I was small because I chose to be silent," I said. "But you just do analysis," he stammered, pointing a shaking finger at the television. "Orion Crest was supposed to win this. Ryland said it was a lock. If Whitaker got it, that means we lost. It means you lost. Graham." I corrected him. "And you lost to me." The realization hit him like a physical blow. He slumped back against the booth, looking sick. He realized that the data he had stolen from my laptop, the data he had risked his marriage to acquire, had been bait. Or worse, it had been useless against the sheer magnitude of what I had actually built. I set my cup down with a sharp clink. The wife mask was gone. I was the CEO now. "Let us go back to the penthouse and the data," I said, my tone stripping away any remaining intimacy. "You are going to tell me exactly how this operation worked." "Who told you to take that file?" Graham looked at me with fear. He was no longer looking at his wife. He was looking at a rival who had just crushed his career. "It was Rylan," Graham confessed, the words tumbling out in a panic. "Rylan and Blair." "They planned it weeks ago. They knew you had legacy access to the infrastructure protocols. Rylan said we needed an edge. The penthouse. It wasn't just for sex. Sloan. It was a drop point. Explain," I commanded. "They needed a place to transfer the files onto the Orion secure drive without triggering the corporate firewall flags at the office," he said, his voice trembling. "Blair said the hotel Wi-Fi at the Harbor Line was encrypted but external. We could wash the data there. They told me to book it under client hospitality so the finance department would clear the cost without asking questions. It was all scripted. And Judith, I asked." Graham closed his eyes. "She is the guarantor. She signed the backing papers for the credit limit. She made you sign that power of attorney the week we got married because she knew we might need to leverage your credit standing one day. She said you were an asset to be managed." I reached for my phone and tapped the screen, stopping the recording. I turned the device around so he could see the red waveform file saving to the cloud. "I am recording this, Graham," I said. "And under the one-party consent law of this state, this conversation is now evidence." Graham lunged across the table, his hand clawing for the phone. "Give that to me. You can't." I pulled the phone back easily, my eyes cold. "Sit down, unless you want a scene that ends with security escorting you out." He collapsed back onto the seat, defeated. He had given me everything: the conspiracy, the names, the motive, and the method. He had implicated the CEO of Orion Crest and his own mother in a federal crime involving corporate espionage and fraud. My phone buzzed with a text message from Morgan. "We have the confession. Now we just need one more bait to tie Orion Crest." The countersuit hit Morgan's desk less than 2 hours after the press conference. Orion Crest was not retreating. They were launching a scorched earth campaign. They filed an emergency injunction, accusing me of a personal vendetta and demanding the court temporarily suspend the $1.1 billion infrastructure contract pending an ethical review. They claimed my actions were driven by a divorce dispute rather than corporate merit. I sat in the war room at Price and Hallow, watching the news cycle turn toxic. The headlines were no longer about the historic contract win. They were about me. CEO or scorned wife, the Whitaker scandal. New CEO entangled in messy divorce drama. Cal projected a series of social media posts onto the smartboard. His face was grim. "They are running a coordinated smear campaign," Cal said, clicking through a folder of screenshots. "Look at these. Anonymous accounts are leaking cropped photos of you looking disheveled from years ago, probably taken when you had the flu. And these text messages? They are fake." I squinted at the screen. There was a screenshot of a text conversation where a contact named Sloan was threatening to burn Graham's house down if he left. "I never wrote that," I said. "I know." Cal replied, "The timestamps do not even match the server logs, but the public does not know that. They are painting you as unstable. It is a classic discrediting tactic." My phone buzzed. A friend from my old neighborhood had sent me a recording from a local church group gathering. I played it. Judith's voice drifted out, trembling with practiced sorrow. "It breaks my heart," Judith was saying to her circle. "My daughter-in-law is unwell. She has always been obsessed with Graham. We tried to help her, but when Graham needed space..." She just snapped. "Now she is trying to destroy his career to get his attention. Please pray for her." I gripped the edge of the table until my knuckles turned white. She was using her prayer circle to assassinate my character. "Ignore the noise," Nina interrupted, her voice cutting through the anger. "Look at the money." She slid a fresh document across the table. "I analyzed the vendor history of Orion Crest going back 5 years. Nina said, "This payment for the penthouse at the harbor line. It is not an anomaly. I found 18 other charges labeled client hospitality at luxury hotels in D.C. and New York. Every single one of them aligns perfectly with the dates that government evaluators were in town for previous contract bids. They are bribing officials," I realized. "They use the hospitality code to cover rooms, escorts, and gifts." "Exactly," Nina said. "And Graham just admitted on tape that they use these rooms to wash data. It is a full-service corruption machine." Morgan's computer chimed with a high-priority alert. She opened an encrypted email that had just arrived. "Well," Morgan said, exhaling slowly, "this is the nail in the coffin. It is from an anonymous sender claiming to be a compliance officer at Orion Crest." She turned the screen toward me. Attached was a digital ledger. It detailed specific transfers categorized as consulting fees sent to the personal accounts of 3 members of the procurement board, the very people who had awarded Orion Crest their previous contracts. "This is federal prison time," Morgan said quietly. "RICO charges, bribery, wire fraud." I stared at the ledger. If I released this, Orion Crest would implode. Hundreds of innocent employees, people who had nothing to do with Rylan Voss or my husband, would lose their jobs. The company would be liquidated, Sloan Morgan asked. "Do we pull the trigger?" I looked back at the screen on the wall, where a news ticker was currently running a quote from an unnamed source calling me emotional and vindictive. "They were not just fighting for a contract. They were trying to erase my dignity. They wanted to turn me into a cautionary tale so that no woman would ever dare to outsmart them again. They made this personal," I said, my voice cold. "I worried about their employees, but they clearly do not care about mine. They are willing to sink my company to save their skins." I looked at Morgan. "Send the ultimatum," I commanded. "Tell Rylan Voss he has 2 hours. He withdraws the lawsuit, issues a public apology admitting to the smear campaign, and agrees to an independent external audit. If he refuses, we send the ledger to the Department of Justice. Morgan typed the email rapidly and hit send. The room fell silent as we waited. The clock ticked on the wall. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Finally, a reply appeared in Morgan's inbox. It was from Rylan Voss himself. There were no salutations, no legal jargon, and no offers of settlement. The body of the email contained just 3 words. Bring your proof. The conference room at Price and Hallow was known as the Icebox, not just for its relentless air conditioning, but for the floor-to-ceiling glass walls that made every occupant feel like a specimen under a microscope. When I walked in, the cast of my nightmare was already assembled. Rylan Voss sat at the head of the table, looking bored. Blair sat to his right, tapping her manicured nails on the glass. Judith sat rigid in her seat, clutching her purse like a shield, while Graham looked like he was about to vomit. I carried nothing but my phone. I sat at the opposite end of the table and placed 2 identical binders on the polished surface. I did not say hello. Let's make this quick, Rylan said, checking his watch. I have a board meeting at 2 in the afternoon. You might want to reschedule that, Morgan said from beside me. She nodded to Nina. Nina stood up and projected the money map onto the glass wall. We have tracked the life cycle of the funds used to book the Penthouse, Nina began, her voice clinical. Judith Halden used a power of attorney to open a credit line in Sloane's name. She then authorized the transaction for the suite. However, the reimbursement for that charge did not come from Graham. It came from Orion Crest, routed through a third-party vendor called Lakefront Advisory, labeled as client hospitality. So what Rylan sneered, we reimburse expenses, not when the expense is for a room used to commit a crime. Cal interrupted. He replaced the money map with a timeline. This is the chain of custody for the file stolen from Sloane's laptop. It went from her hard drive to Graham's device at 2:47 in the morning, then to an internal Orion email, and finally to a shared cloud folder owned by Blair Voss. The room went quiet. The air grew heavy. I did not steal it, Blair suddenly shouted, her composure cracking. She turned visibly on Judith. She gave us the password. She told me it was family property. I just did what I was told. This was a family plan. Judith's face turned a mottled red. You little liar. I was trying to help my son. She turned to me, her eyes venomous. And you cannot use any of this. You signed a non-disclosure agreement. It is ironclad. If you speak, I will sue you for every penny you think you have. Morgan laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. The NDA has a fraud exception clause. Judith, you cannot contractually bind someone to silence regarding a felony they are the victim of. That document is paper trash. Graham slammed his hands on the table, startling everyone. Stop it, he yelled, tears welling in his eyes. I was forced, Rylan said if I didn't get the data, I was out. My mother said if I didn't secure my position, I was a failure. I am the victim here. I was just following orders. I looked at my husband. He was pathetic. I leaned forward, locking eyes with him. If you are a victim, Graham, then tell me, I said softly. What did you sign in the penthouse that night? We know you met a courier. What was on the paper? Graham's eyes darted to Rylan, who gave a nearly imperceptible shake of his head, but Graham was too terrified to see it. It was just an addendum. Graham stammered, his voice shaking. It was a transfer of usage rights for the technology specs. Rylan needed it to look legal for the bid. The silence that followed was absolute. Rylan closed his eyes. Blair stopped tapping her nails. Even Judith looked horrified. Thank you. Graham, I said, you just admitted to conspiring to falsify intellectual property ownership for a federal contract. Rylan finally spoke, his voice low and dangerous. What do you want? Sloane? I reached out and opened the cover of Binder A. I left Binder B closed, its contents a heavy threat sitting between us. I want you to look at the offer, I said. Because once I open the second binder, The offer expires. Binder A is a settlement agreement, I said, my voice cutting through the hum of the air conditioning like a blade. Orion Crest will immediately withdraw the countersuit and issue a public apology stating that the smear campaign was baseless. You will pay a settlement fee of $6 million for damages and legal costs. You will also submit to an independent audit and turn over every server drive containing files with my digital hash for secure destruction. I turned my gaze to Judith, who was trembling in her chair. For you, Judith, it is simple, I continued. You will reimburse every cent charged to my card, including the Penthouse bill, and you will sign a sworn statement admitting that you abused your power of attorney to commit financial fraud. If you refuse, I file a separate civil suit against you tomorrow morning. And for you, Blair, Morgan added, sliding a specific document toward the younger woman, you will dissolve Lakefront Advisory immediately. You will file amended tax returns declaring the illicit income, and you will sign a permanent non-contact and non-disparagement agreement. It is a legal leash. One wrong word about Sloan, and you go to jail for tax evasion. Rylan picked up the binder, flipped through 2 pages, and then tossed it back onto the table with a sneer. He chuckled, a cold, metallic sound that grated against the glass walls. You expect me to buy this? Rylan asked, leaning back. You are bluffing. Sloan, you do not have the stomach for a war. You are just a risk analyst trying to play poker with the big boys. Let me see Binder B. I did not hesitate. I slid the second binder across the glass table. Rylan opened it. The first page was the bribery ledger Nina had uncovered. The second was the log of data transfers. The third was a transcript of the recording I had just made of Graham, detailing the conspiracy. And the final page was the printed email from his own compliance officer. That is not a settlement, I said. That is a roadmap for a federal criminal investigation. Bribery, wire fraud, corporate espionage, if I hand that to the Department of Justice. Orion Crest is debarred from government contracts for 10 years. You go to prison. Rylan. Rylan stared at the documents, his face turning the color of ash. He read the ledger, his eyes darting back and forth. Then, the panic in his eyes hardened into something much colder. He slowly closed the binder and turned his gaze toward his daughter. You went too far. Blair, Rylan said, his voice dripping with disgust. I told you to handle the logistics. I did not tell you to involve my company in a sloppy theft. You compromised us. Blair gasped, her mouth falling open in disbelief. What you told me to do it. You said we needed the edge. You said Sloan was the weak link. I have no recollection of that, Rylan said smoothly, preparing to sacrifice his own child to save the ship. This was your operation, you and your lover. Blair's shock turned to pure, unadulterated rage. She reached into her designer bag, her hands shaking so hard she nearly dropped the contents, and slammed a crumpled piece of paper onto the glass table. You want to play that game. Dad, she screamed. Here. This is the scan of the signature page from the Penthouse meeting. Look at the bottom line. We all looked. Next to Graham's shaky scrawl was a bold, arrogant signature in blue ink. Rylan Voss. You were there, Blair hissed. You signed the witness line for the data transfer. If I go down, you are coming with me. The room was spinning out of control. Judith suddenly put her head in her hands and began to sob, a harsh, ugly sound that echoed in the sterile room. He made me do it, Judith wailed, pointing a trembling finger at Rylan. He holds the notes on the family trust I made bad investments. Terrible investments in real estate. He bought the debt. He said he would foreclose on the Halden estate and leave us on the street if I didn't help Graham secure the contract. I did it to save the family. I looked at the 3 of them. A father sacrificing his daughter, a daughter blackmailing her father, and a mother selling out her son and daughter-in-law to cover her own financial incompetence. They were not a powerful dynasty. They were a nest of vipers eating each other alive. I looked at the clock on the wall. You have 5 minutes to decide which binder you want, I said, checking my watch. Tick-tock. We need time to review the language, Rylan said, his fingers drumming a nervous rhythm on the glass table. This is a complex agreement. We cannot just sign away $6 million in corporate autonomy in 5 minutes. Time is the exact weapon you use to try and break her, Morgan replied, her voice sharp and final. You used it to drain her accounts and her reputation. You are out of time. Graham suddenly stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. His eyes were wide with a desperate, frantic energy. Wait! Graham shouted, fumbling with his phone. I have insurance. I recorded her too. In the cafe this morning. She threatened me. She said she would destroy us all if we did not pay her. If I play this for the judge, her little victim act falls apart. Rylan looked at him with a glimmer of hope. Play it! Graham pressed the button with a triumphant smile. The audio crackled to life in the silent room. But it was not my voice that filled the space. It was his. I had no choice. I was under so much pressure. It was just a transfer of rights, to certify the data source as internal Orion property. If I didn't sign, they were going to fire me. The silence that followed was suffocating. Graham froze, realizing too late that in his panic to record me, he had captured his own unfiltered confession regarding the theft and the fraudulent addendum. He had just played his own admission of guilt to the very people he was trying to save. You idiot, Rylan whispered, the color draining from his face. You just recorded your own felony. Blair looked at Graham with pure hatred. She knew the game was over. The recording was the final nail, and Graham had hammered it in himself. Binder A, I said, pointing to the document. Sign it. Now. You will also sign the release form authorizing my independent auditor to seize your servers within the hour. Then, the twist happened. I expected Rylan to be the first to move, to try and salvage his company, but it was Judith. My mother-in-law snatched the pen from the table with a trembling hand. She realized she was the most expendable piece on the board. If Rylan went down, he would take her trust fund and her home. She needed immunity. I am signing, Judith said, her voice shaking. I am not going to prison for your stupid company. Rylan. She scrawled her name rapidly, practically tearing the paper. Rylan stared at her, betrayed by the woman he had manipulated for years. He realized he had no allies left. He grabbed the second pen and signed the settlement, his signature jagged and angry. I took the binder back and wrote one final sentence at the bottom of the agreement in clear, block letters. If any payment or audit requirement is delayed by more than 30 days, the contents of Binder B will be automatically released to the Department of Justice. You are cruel, Blair sobbed, tears ruining her perfect makeup. You have everything you want. Why do you have to humiliate us like this? You are a monster. I looked at her cold, tear-stained face. You call it cruel because you have never paid a price for anything in your life, I said. This is not cruelty. Blair, this is arithmetic. Graham fell to his knees, grabbing the edge of my jacket. It was a pathetic display. Sloan, please, he begged. I can change. I can help you run Whitaker Relay. I know the systems. Just give me a position. An entry-level job. Don't leave me with them. I pulled my jacket from his grip and looked down at him. There was no love left. Not even anger. Just a vast, empty indifference. You do not love me, Graham, I said. You love access. And your access is revoked. I turned and walked out of the room. I did not look back. Behind me. The only sound was the scratching of pens on paper, cutting through the silence like knives. Assets. Data. Reputation. Morgan texted me as the elevator doors closed. Locked. I walked down the long glass corridor of the office building, the city of Chicago sprawling beneath me. I pulled out my phone one last time. I opened the legal administration app. I found the master file for the Halden Family Trust and the power of attorney permissions I had granted years ago. I did not just freeze a card this time. I pressed the red button marked Revoke All Authorizations. The loading circle spun for a second, then disappeared. Done. I was no longer a wife, a victim, or a tool. I was free. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Please leave a comment letting me know where you are tuning in from so we can connect and share our thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like the video, and hit the hype button to help this story reach even more people.